He stood there, her ex-husband uninvited, unannounced at the back of the chapel, eyes burning with disbelief as he watched her radiant in white, whispering vows to another man. "You really did it," he spat. Stepping forward, "You married into money without even giving me a chance to fix us." But Isabelle didn't flinch. Not this time. Her voice calm, her spine straight. She simply said, "We stopped being us the day you walked away. This is my new beginning." And in that moment, as Nathaniel reached for her hand and the hush of the room turned into applause, Isabelle knew this wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning, a story of heartbreak, resilience, and the kind of love that doesn't rescue you, but stands beside you as you rise on your own. If you're ready to witness a story that begins in betrayal and ends in redemption, one that reminds us that sometimes the best second chances are the ones we never saw coming, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because this is a love story born from courage. Now let's begin. After the separation, a single mother found love again. But what unfolded next would leave her past trembling in disbelief. In a quiet coastal town on the edge of Portland, Isabelle Rowan had once believed that love could weather anything. She had believed in loyalty and forever, in whispered promises made beneath the glow of kitchen lights, until one day, none of it was enough. At just over 31, she was alone. A newborn daughter asleep against her chest, and a silence in her chest where laughter used to echo. The man she had once called her future was now a fading echo in an empty hallway. Her husband, no ex-husband. Caleb Donovan had insisted it was mutual, that things just unraveled, but Isabelle knew the truth. They hadn't unraveled. He had let go. They had built something fragile from their college days, paper-thin dreams patched together with faith and struggle. But as the years passed and the bills stacked higher than their hopes, Caleb's warmth turned cold, his once playful ambition hardened into silent frustration. And when Isabelle told him she was pregnant, she thought it might reignite the love they had once fought so hard for. Instead, it pushed him further away. He said they weren't ready. He said she was being naive. The arguments that followed cut deeper than any silence ever could. Now, with 7-month-old Ella, wrapped in a faded cotton blanket, Isabelle stood in the living room they had once painted together. Caleb's belongings were packed into mismatched boxes. His cologne still lingered in the air, but his heart had left long before his feet did. At the door, he paused. For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Guilt. Maybe. Maybe grief. She didn't care to name it. He muttered something like, "Take care," and disappeared into the drizzle. The soft slam of the trunk, sounding like a final period at the end of a life she didn't want to reread. She didn't cry right away. Not until she sank into the couch, holding Ella like a lifeline. Then the sobs came, quiet and bitter. She wasn't grieving a man. She was grieving the version of herself who believed she was enough. Isabelle wiped her face and glanced at the photos still lingering on the side table, glossy memories from a life that had dissolved into dust. But there was no time for self-pity. She had Ella, and that meant she had purpose. Her part-time job at a neighborhood outreach center barely covered rent. Her parents were thousands of miles away in New Mexico, their own battles with aging leaving little room for her burdens. So Isabelle didn't ask. She carried her world in silence and hoped somehow it wouldn't collapse. What she didn't know was that a stranger, a man named Matthew Blake, would soon walk into that brokenness, not to fix it, but to make her believe in beginnings again. Not the kind written in fairy tales, but the kind born from ashes. "Goodbye, Caleb," Isabelle whispered gently, her lips brushing her daughter's forehead. Ella gripped a strand of her mother's hair, letting out a babble that was more comfort than sound. In that moment, in that fragile, honest melody, Isabelle found something that felt almost like light love could unravel, Promises could disappear. But motherhood, that stayed. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act, exhaustion and determination twined together like roots. Isabelle fought to rebuild a life she hadn't planned, one diaper change, one electric bill, one long sigh at a time. There were nights she stared at the ceiling, wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. What she didn't know was that someone unexpected, someone who had built his life from fortune and formality, was about to walk into her world and rearrange everything. As autumn deepened and the trees outside her window shed their leaves in quiet surrender, Isabelle pressed on. At Northbridge Outreach, the nonprofit where she worked, she found both routine and purpose. Helping struggling families find housing and new beginnings reminded her of who she still was beneath the heartbreak. One crisp Tuesday morning in late October, Isabelle arrived early, a coffee cup balanced between her teeth, client folders under one arm and Ella's diaper bag slipping off the other. The air stung her cheeks, but it grounded her, reminded her she was still here, still standing. After dropping Ella off at the cozy volunteer-run daycare in the corner of the office, Isabelle hurried to her desk. She was barely settled when her supervisor, Marla Jennings, waved her into the conference room. Expecting a routine check-in, Isabelle stepped through the door and stopped. A man stood by the far window, tall, composed, wearing a tailored navy suit that looked custom-cut. His hands were tucked neatly in front of him, a polite smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "This is Nathaniel Grant," Marla said warmly. "He's the founder of Grant & Wells and is exploring a potential partnership with us." Isabelle extended her hand and tried not to stare. She had heard of the Grant name before, whispered through grant-writing meetings and charity galas. She never had time to attend. He was known for backing projects that didn't just sound good but did good. Nathaniel's handshake was firm, his voice low and thoughtful. He asked about the program's impact, housing rates, community success stories, long-term sustainability. Then he turned to Isabelle. "And you?" he asked, his tone inviting but steady. "What do you see when you look at this place?" Her words surprised even her. She spoke not in numbers but in names, families who came in with nothing but left with keys and hope. She talked about single parents fighting to hold their homes together, about mental health childcare, and the small victories that never made it into reports. Nathaniel listened, really listened, his gaze never drifting, his notes sparse but deliberate. There was no arrogance, no performance, only a quiet attentiveness that felt rare. As the meeting ended, he turned to her and said, "You speak like someone who's lived what she's trying to change. That kind of voice is hard to ignore." She murmured a thank you, cheeks warm, and left quickly to fetch Ella for their midday walk. But his words stayed. So did the way he'd said them, not as a compliment, but a recognition. That evening, as she fed Ella pureed carrots and wiped mashed fruit off the counter, Isabelle caught herself staring out the window. The light was fading. The house was quiet. But inside her chest, something stirred. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was curiosity. A quiet flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. There was no reason for her heart to skip when he spoke to her, and yet it did. Isabelle shook the feeling off, pushing the notion aside. She had more pressing things to focus on: the heating bill, Ella's teething a dwindling grocery budget. Whatever momentary warmth she'd felt in Nathaniel's presence, it had no place in her carefully managed world. She had no way of knowing that this accidental encounter with a quiet billionaire would be just the beginning, the first tremor in a wave of change that would ripple all the way back to the man who once promised to stand by her forever. In the following weeks, the name Grant & Wells echoed throughout the Northbridge Outreach office. Their team began conducting subtle audits, evaluating impact numbers, assessing long-term viability. Staff felt the shift. Everyone hoped this discreet, influential firm would become a lifeline. Isabelle, already juggling endless tasks, found herself pulled into giving site tours, compiling reports, and coordinating visits for Nathaniel's associates. yet she rarely saw him again, just murmurs from Marla that he's particularly interested in our transitional housing program, or Mr. Grant appreciated your clarity in last week's report. Then one late Thursday afternoon, as she was packing up, he appeared at her desk, quiet and composed. "I was hoping I'd catch you," he said, holding a leather folder. "I've reviewed the full reports, but I'd appreciate hearing your perspective. Would you be open to a short conversation over coffee?" Normally, Isabelle would have hesitated, especially after hours, but Marla's earlier remark about how much weight his opinion carried played on her mind. And if she was honest, so did her curiosity. She glanced at the time Ella was at daycare until 6. She had an hour. Sure, she said, there's a cafe just around the corner. They ended up at a tucked-away place with amber lights, wood-paneled walls, and the comforting hum of espresso machines. Amid the gentle chaos of the after-work crowd, Isabelle felt strangely calm. Nathaniel asked questions, thoughtful ones, not about numbers, but about people. About the emotional weight of their work, the stories behind every intake form, the nights when volunteers stayed long past closing to comfort a crying child. Isabelle spoke honestly, her voice catching at times as she described mothers living out of their cars. Children who hid snacks because they didn't trust food would come tomorrow. He never interrupted, just listened, his pen occasionally scratching across a notebook. When they exhausted the formal topics, Isabelle moved to gather her things, but Nathaniel didn't rise. "I'm grateful for this," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's easy to forget the names behind the numbers. You remind me why it matters." She smiled gently. "That's why I do what I do. People deserve more than just line items on a grant application." His gaze drifted, pausing momentarily on her left hand, where a faint indent still marked the absence of a wedding band. His expression softened. "You strike me as someone who's lived her own share of hard chapters," Isabelle exhaled. "We all have," she said simply. Then she noticed the time I need to pick up my daughter. At the mention of her child, something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of something curiosity, maybe, but he only nodded. "Of course, thank you again, Isabelle." As she left, he stood offering a quiet, "Take care." That evening, back in her kitchen, Isabelle mashed bananas for Ella and wiped rice cereal off the high chair tray, but her thoughts kept drifting not to the meeting or the potential funding, but to Nathaniel's steady voice, the way he really listened, and the quiet sincerity she couldn't quite name. She reminded herself it was nothing, just business. But part of her, the part that hadn't dared feel anything in over a year, wasn't entirely convinced. She had no way of knowing that soon an invitation would arrive, one that would test not only her boundaries but her heart, and that somewhere across town her ex-husband would soon realize that the woman he let go was now walking a path he'd never imagined, one that didn't lead back to him. By the time December arrived, Northbridge was abuzz with anticipation. Among the year's most anticipated events was the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, a glittering winter fundraiser held at the historic Halston Grand, co-hosted by Grant & Wells, along with several blue-chip firms. Whispers had already begun circulating. Nathaniel Grant would be making a formal announcement regarding the foundation's partnership with Northbridge Outreach that night. For Isabelle, the invitation came like a bolt of lightning, both thrilling and terrifying. A black-tie affair at a five-star hotel filled with Manhattan's upper crust. It was a world she'd only seen in magazine pages. Marla, ever the firm believer in representation, insisted Isabelle attend. "You're the face of the real work. They need to hear you, not just see spreadsheets." But even with her supervisor's reassurance, Isabelle hesitated. Her bank account barely stretched to cover a new winter coat, let alone an evening gown or professional styling. Marla waved off her concerns. The board approved it. Consider it a work investment. And so, with reluctant gratitude, Isabelle agreed. On the night of the gala, she arrived beneath the gilded archways of the Halston Grand, her breath catching in the winter air. She wore a rented black satin gown with understated beadwork paired with simple heels. Her hair had been pulled back into a clean, elegant bun by her neighbor, a former salon owner who insisted on helping. Clutching the invitation with trembling fingers, Isabelle stepped into the ballroom, a world bathed in candlelight and crystal chandeliers, where music from a live quartet floated above a sea of polished conversation and champagne. She nearly turned on her heel until she spotted Marla waving near an ornate ice sculpture shaped like the foundation's logo. Relief flooded her. Introductions followed quickly. Donors, trustees, executives. Isabelle offered polite smiles and sipped ginger ale, her eyes scanning the room with quiet apprehension. Then a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "I was hoping you'd come." She turned to find Nathaniel Grant, impeccable in a tailored tux, his gaze warm, not performative but real. "You look." He paused, searching for the right word. Striking color rose to her cheeks. "Thank you. I don't usually belong in rooms like this." "Then the room needs to adjust," he said, matter of fact. He led her through the glittering maze of guests, asking her to share real stories, stories of families of resilience, of transformation. And as she spoke, her voice steadying with each sentence, something shifted. The room listened, not just to her words, but to the weight behind them. And Isabelle, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel like she was simply surviving. She felt seen. Later, as the room quieted for a round of donor toasts, Nathaniel pulled her aside toward a quieter alcove near the balcony. "They're doubling their pledge," he said, his voice low. "That's because of you. The way you spoke, they heard you." Isabelle's breath hitched. She blinked away, the emotion prickling at the edges of her lashes. Around them, the glow of chandeliers reflected against gold-trimmed mirrors. And yet all she could think about were the children who would now have warm beds this winter. "Thank you." She whispered the words heavier than they sounded. Gratitude, not just for the donation, but for the fact that someone like Nathaniel had handed her the microphone instead of taking it for himself. There was a pause. His gaze held hers, something unspoken flickering between them. Then the quartet began a soft waltz, and couples drifted toward the center of the marble floor. Nathaniel looked at her, hesitant. "Would you like to dance, or do you need to get back to your daughter?" Isabelle hesitated, torn between duty and the unfamiliar stir of wanting something for herself. For once, just once, she wanted to say yes. "One dance," she said, her voice barely above the music. He extended his hand. And as he led her onto the floor, her heels clicking softly against marble, Isabelle allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in a long time. Not romance, not escape, but peace. She had no way of knowing that this one dance, this one decision to say yes, would become the turning point in a story neither of them saw coming. She didn't know it then, but that quiet waltz beneath golden chandeliers would become more than just a memory. It would be the moment the current changed a quiet beginning to something that would ripple across everything, even the life she'd left behind with Jack Monroe. In the days after the gala, Isabelle's world began to shift in subtle, unexpected ways. Nathaniel Grant started visiting Northbridge Outreach more often. Officially, he was checking on the progress of the partnership, but Isabelle could sense there was more to it than spreadsheets and funding reports. He brought coffee some mornings, not a generic cup, but her favorite vanilla blend from the corner cafe. He lingered at her desk after team meetings, asking about her clients, the stories that weren't in the data, and occasionally about Amelia. Their conversations spilled over into quiet lunches under a tree near the park down the street, or slow walks around the block during breaks. At first, Isabelle kept a cautious distance. She'd been down this road before, seen how tenderness could be a disguise for control, how affection could turn into abandonment. But Nathaniel never pressed. He didn't ask about the pain she carried. He didn't pretend to have answers. He simply listened with the kind of presence that made her feel seen, not studied. Then one chilly Saturday morning, her phone buzzed. "There's a small supply drive in Oakmere tomorrow, a daycare for single working moms." We're sending a few boxes, but I could use a hand organizing on site. Only if you're free. No pressure. Isabelle hesitated. Her weekends were sacred. Time to reset to just be with Amelia. But the cause mattered, and something about the simplicity of his message disarmed her. She agreed, packing a few essentials and preparing to drop Amelia with her neighbor, Mrs. Devlin. But Nathaniel had other plans. Bring her along, he'd said warmly. I'd be honored to meet her. And so that afternoon, Isabelle found herself inside a modest community hall, arms deep in boxes of formula diapers and baby clothes. Amelia toddled beside her, clinging to a stuffed rabbit. The room buzzed with volunteers from Grant and Wells, everyone moving with cheerful efficiency. Then Nathaniel walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a simple gray sweater and rolled-up sleeves. His usual polish had softened into something grounded, human. When Amelia looked up at him wide-eyed and unsure, Nathaniel didn't tower or reach down absently. He crouched to her level, held out a small plush bear, and said gently, "May I?" She took it with a giggle. And just like that, a quiet connection formed. For the next hour, he found little ways to engage her, helping her sort stuffed animals by color, making goofy faces that made her laugh until she hiccuped. Isabelle watched in silence, something fragile and unexpected blooming in her chest. Even Jack, during the brief weeks after Amelia was born, had never looked at her like that. Never tried to soothe her when she cried. His love, if it had ever existed, had been paper-thin cracking at the first sign of strain. Later, as the last box was sealed, and the final thank yous exchanged, only the three of them remained. Nathaniel offered a ride home. Isabelle hesitated, then nodded. In the SUV with Amelia drifting off in her car seat. Isabelle glanced sideways. Nathaniel kept his eyes on the road, but every now and then he peeked at the mirror, checking on Amelia, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. She watched the way his fingers relaxed on the steering wheel, the way his voice dropped when he hummed along softly to the jazz on the radio. It stirred something inside her. Not love, not yet, but the ache of possibility. That night, in their small living room, Isabelle sat in the rocking chair with Amelia cradled against her chest. The only light came from the soft glow of a string of fairy lights across the window. As she hummed an old lullaby and felt Amelia's breath slow against her, she closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to wonder, what if fatherhood didn't have to mean disappointment? What if kindness could stay? The questions scared her, but not as much as how much she wanted the answers to be real. As Amelia nuzzled into her mother's chest that night, her tiny hand gripping the fabric of Isabelle's sweater, a quiet truth settled into Isabelle's bones. Children could sense sincerity long before words were spoken, and in her daughter's peaceful sleep after a long day with Nathaniel, Isabelle felt it a quiet, instinctive trust. And that was how her heart, so carefully guarded, began to soften. But just as that warmth began to bloom, life reminded her how fragile peace could be. It came with a single ring on a gray afternoon, her phone screen flashing a name she hadn't seen in almost half a year. Jack Monroe. The sight made her breath catch in her throat. Her fingers hovered before finally tapping the screen. His voice came through taut and urgent. "Izzy, I need to talk to you. Please, face to face." She froze, a mix of caution and old pain stirring beneath her ribs. "Jack, why now? I know you don't owe me anything, but it's important. Just meet me somewhere public, if that's easier." Against every instinct, she agreed. Curiosity and a lingering sense of unfinished business propelled her forward. Later that evening, she left Amelia with her neighbor, Mrs. Devlin, and walked into a small cafe on Harper Street, the kind with steamed-up windows and old jazz playing faintly through tinny speakers. Jack was already there, seated by the window. His once polished appearance had dulled. The sharp crease of his suit was replaced by wrinkles and weary eyes. He stood when he saw her, awkwardly straightening his jacket. "Thanks for coming," he said. She nodded, her expression unreadable. They sat across from each other, silence thick like fog between them. Then without preamble he spoke. "I messed up Isabelle life after everything. It's been a mess. I lost my job. My new relationship didn't last more than a few months. And now I don't even recognize myself." She said nothing, watching him crumble slowly in front of her. Gone was the man who had once left her to raise their child alone. In his place sat someone worn down by consequence. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. He looked up, desperate. "Because I miss Amelia. I want to be part of her life. I want to try." Those words she had yearned to hear in the early weeks of motherhood now landed with the weight of uncertainty. Her heart pounded. She wanted to scream. "Where were you when she was sick at midnight? When I couldn't afford diapers? When I cried in the shower so she wouldn't hear me?" But she didn't. She just said evenly, "She's almost 2 now. Jack, she doesn't know you. You can't show up when it's convenient." He looked down, ashamed. "I know, but I'm asking, not for you to forgive me, just to consider letting me try." She closed her eyes, heart torn. "I'll think about it," she said at last. "But if you disappear again, I won't let you hurt her. Not ever." He nodded solemnly, and they parted under the soft drizzle of the evening. His shoulders slumped as he disappeared into the growing fog. That night, as Isabelle returned to their quiet apartment, she couldn't shake the heaviness. There was something cruelly satisfying in watching Jack unravel, but also something terrifying in the door he'd asked her to open. Would Amelia be better with a father who tried too late, or without one at all? As she tucked her daughter into bed, her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. A message lit up the screen. "You seemed quiet today. Just checking in. Is everything okay?" "Nathaniel." Isabelle stared at the text, the warmth of his thoughtfulness brushing up against the storm she had walked through just hours earlier. She stood in the doorway of Amelia's room for a long while, watching her sleep torn between the past that was knocking and the future quietly waiting. She typed a short reply, "I'm okay. Thanks for checking in." Then set the phone down and exhaled slow and heavy. But she wasn't okay, not really, because life in its cruel timing had brought Jack Monroe back into her orbit, just as Nathaniel Hartman began quietly stepping into it. And the convergence of those two worlds felt like standing between two tides. As winter settled over Crescent Hill, the city sparkled under a fresh coat of snow, and Harbor Haven's final quarter came to a close, its programs thriving largely thanks to the steady support of Hartman and Co. Isabelle's days became a balancing act between work motherhood and the growing presence of Nathaniel. He dropped by often now, sometimes with new ideas for community outreach, other times just to share coffee or invite her to small-scale charity galas. Their conversations, always thoughtful, flowed easily. He never overstepped, he never demanded, but his presence lingered long after he left. One crisp evening, Nathaniel invited her to a community celebration honoring the opening of a new transitional housing center. Isabelle hesitated. It meant asking Mrs. Devlin to watch Amelia again, and guilt tugged at her. But the project meant something to her. It aligned with everything she believed in. So she went, wearing a modest navy dress bundled in a wool coat. She arrived at the church hall just as dusk fell. Inside, the space was warm, filled with the laughter of families, and the scent of cider photos of soon-to-be residents adorned the walls, reminders of why they all did this work. Nathaniel met her at the entrance, his smile softer than usual, his charcoal coat dusted with snow. All night he stayed close, not possessive, but protective. He introduced her to donors with a quiet kind of pride, letting her speak about housing insecurity with the passion only someone who had lived on the edge could carry. When the event wound down, he offered to walk her to her car. The city lights shimmered on icy sidewalks. As they reached a quiet corner beneath a flickering street lamp, he paused, rubbing his hands together as if to summon courage. "There's something I've been wanting to say." He began, his voice low and hesitant. "Isabelle, meeting you and Amelia has changed the way I see. Everything I thought my work, my wealth gave me purpose. But you showed me that true meaning comes from connection, from love." He stepped back just enough to look her in the eyes. "I know your trust was broken. I'd never expect you to rush into anything, but I want you to know this. I love you, Isabelle, and I want to be part of your life. And Amelia's too, if you'll have me." Her breath caught. She had known deep down that this moment might come, the looks, the kindness, the patience, but to hear it, to be offered love again, real love, made her knees weak. Her mind flickered to Jack, the promises that faded, the affection that vanished, the months of silence and survival. Could she open her heart again? Nathaniel's voice broke her reverie. "We'll move as slow as you need, but I couldn't go another day without telling you." She blinked away tears, touched by his openness. Her voice came small but steady. "I care about you, more than I expected to. But I have a daughter, and I won't ever let her get caught in something that isn't real." He nodded. "No disappointment, just understanding. Then let's build something real. On your terms." She leaned into his warmth, the snow falling around them like a blessing. It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was the beginning of something she thought she'd never feel again: hope. On that still winter night, beneath a sky dusted in snow and silence, Nathaniel Hartman's words lingered like warmth in the cold, a quiet promise that if handled with care might change everything. As the holiday season bloomed in full, Isabelle Carter found herself caught between waves of joy and uncertainty. Nathaniel's confession replayed in her thoughts, gentle, sincere, and terrifying in its vulnerability. She shared her hesitation with Carmen, her lifelong friend, over cups of hot cider and scattered toy blocks. Carmen had grinned knowingly. "You don't get chances like this twice, Izzy. A man like that, who sees you, really sees you, that's rare." But the shadow of Jack Monroe and his recent attempt to reconnect with Amelia cast a chill over her newfound clarity. Could she truly welcome someone new into their life, when the man who once walked away now asked for a second chance, not with her, but with their daughter? New Year's Eve arrived on a whisper of snow and possibility. Nathaniel extended a gentle invitation, a quiet celebration at a cabin in the Northridge Pines. Just a few close friends, warm fires, and no press or fanfare. Isabelle hesitated. Traveling with a toddler to meet unfamiliar people felt like a risk, but the thought of leaving the noise of the city behind, even just for a night, made her say yes. The cabin stood like something from a winter storybook, tucked among evergreens dusted in white, glowing softly beneath strings of golden lights. Inside, the scent of pine and spiced cider wrapped around her like a blanket. Laughter echoed between walls lined with books and old photographs. Nathaniel's friends, a mix of nonprofit founders and college friends, welcomed her like she belonged. Amelia, wide-eyed and pink-cheeked, tottered around with a knitted hat slipping sideways, collecting compliments and cookies. They shared dinner seated around a long wooden table, bowls of hearty stew, passed with stories of years gone by. Nathaniel remained close, his hand never far, his glance always soft when it settled on her. When conversation turned technical or old memories resurfaced, he quietly turned to Isabelle and said, "This one matters most. She's the future of Harbor Haven." Later, with Amelia, dozing in a travel crib, the group stepped outside to a private fireworks display. Nathaniel had arranged subtle, beautiful, meant more for wonder than spectacle. Wrapped in a thick shawl, Isabelle stood at the edge of the clearing, Amelia cradled against her chest. The sky blossomed with quiet bursts of gold and blue. Snowflakes fell slow, catching in her lashes. Nathaniel joined her, his coat brushing hers. He reached out gently, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "I know this isn't easy," he said, voice nearly lost in the hush of falling snow. "But thank you for trusting me, for being here." She turned to him, a smile trembling at the edges of her lips. "It is a leap," she whispered, "but somehow it doesn't feel like falling." The crowd counted down in the distance. At midnight, with cheers behind them and stars overhead, Nathaniel took Amelia from her arms with the gentlest care, kissed the little girl's forehead, then turned to Isabelle, with eyes full of something that reached beyond words. He kissed her tender true, and for a moment the snow stopped falling and the world stood still. In that one kiss, Isabelle felt something settle inside her. Not a happily ever after. Not yet. But a beginning built not on illusion, but choice. Yet deep down, she knew this story wasn't finished. Because love, real love, never comes without echoes. And some echoes, like footsteps in the snow, don't stay buried for long. And somewhere far from that cabin in the woods, Jack Monroe was about to make a move that would test everything. Isabelle thought she'd finally begun to rebuild. January swept in with a quiet rhythm, like snow falling on worn paths. And with it came new beginnings for Isabelle Carter, carefully unfolding like pages in a book she wasn't quite ready to finish. Her relationship with Nathaniel Hartman deepened, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet comfort of shared routines. He joined her and little Amelia for home-cooked meals, often arriving early to help stir soup or coax giggles from the toddler with outlandish spoon games. He fit into the domestic rhythm of her world with unexpected ease, never overstepping, but always showing up. Meanwhile, Jack Monroe remained a distant hum in the background, texting on occasion, asking if she had reconsidered letting him visit Amelia. Isabelle held the line. Her reply had been clear: stability first, then we'll talk to her. Surprised, Jack responded with humility. He had started a new job at a smaller firm and more unexpectedly had begun therapy. It was something, but not enough. One crisp Saturday, Nathaniel invited Isabelle to join him at Hartman and Wells' annual winter retreat, a company gathering held at a sprawling estate just outside of Hudson Valley. He assured her it was family-friendly and that Amelia would be more than welcome. She hesitated, unsure how they'd be received, but with a cautious hope she agreed. The estate felt like something from a snow globe, rolling lawns blanketed in white bonfires crackling beside wooden benches and a pavilion warmed by fairy lights and steaming mugs of mulled cider. Children scampered through the snow, bundled like tiny explorers, and Amelia soon toddled off after them, her laughter trailing like wind chimes in winter air. Isabelle mingled quietly. She noticed how many employees recognized her from charity photos, media blurbs, whispers. She half expected judgment, but to her surprise, many greeted her with warmth, some even thanking her for the changes they saw in Nathaniel. "He's lighter these days," one colleague said more. Human later, while Amelia napped in a stroller under the pavilion, Nathaniel took Isabelle by the hand and led her onto a quiet terrace that overlooked the frozen lake. The sky was fading to soft blue. Snow fell in delicate spirals. He stood still for a moment, then turned to her, the weight of something unspoken behind his eyes. "Isabelle, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped. "We're just beginning," she said gently, "and I'm still finding my way." He nodded, squeezing her hand. "I know, but this is important. My mother, Evelyn Hartman, returns from Vienna next week. She's old-world traditional, and she may not understand this. Us." The words didn't sting as much as they settled. Isabelle had known deep down that status came with shadows. "She may judge," he continued, "but I won't let that change what we're building." She held his gaze firm despite the frost in her lungs. I've walked through harder things than her opinions, she said quietly. I won't apologize for the life I've lived, or for my daughter. Relief softened his posture. He drew her into an embrace, the pine scent of the evergreens wrapping around them like a quiet promise. But even in that tender moment, Isabelle felt the first ripple of another storm. Love like theirs, honest, unexpected, always attracts scrutiny, and far across the city, Jack Monroe was planning his return, unwilling to be forgotten in a story he once believed belonged to him. Because the past has a way of knocking, even when you've finally dared to leave the door open to something new. The first meeting with Evelyn Hartman took place over an understated brunch in a refined brownstone nestled in Upper Manhattan, the kind of place where silence felt polished and every gesture carried weight. Nathaniel had arranged the encounter with careful optimism, hoping that civility could build a bridge. Isabelle arrived with a steadying breath and a tightly knotted stomach. She wore a simple navy dress and wrapped Amelia in a soft blush cardigan, her curls brushed into neat spirals. The doorman ushered them into a formal sitting room that felt more like a museum than a home. Evelyn, tall and impeccably composed in her early 60s, stood slowly from a tufted velvet armchair. Her presence filled the space before her voice did. "Miss Carter, is it?" "A pleasure," she said, offering a handshake just short of warm. Isabelle offered a quiet smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartman. This is my daughter, Amelia." Evelyn's eyes cool, and assessing drifted to the toddler in Isabelle's arms. She extended a manicured finger toward the child who stared at it with innocent curiosity. Her touch, like her tone, was calculated, neither cold nor affectionate, just precise. Nathaniel quickly guided them to the table, hoping to smooth the edges of the encounter. The brunch was beautifully set, a row of delicate china and silver cutlery, arranged with such symmetry that it seemed untouched by human hands. Conversation began with practiced ease. Evelyn asked about Isabelle's work with Harbor Path, her upbringing, her goals. Every question felt like a polite test, each response a line in an invisible report card. Isabelle answered calmly, her voice steady, but her heartbeat wild beneath the surface. Nathaniel, sensing the unspoken tensions, redirected the exchange toward their joint work in community projects. He praised Isabelle's impact, her vision. Evelyn listened, nodding, but her smile rarely reached her eyes. Midway through the meal, Evelyn set down her teacup with a quiet clink. Nathaniel mentioned, "You and your daughter have become important to him." She said carefully, "I wonder, what do you see when you think about the future?" Isabelle felt heat rise to her cheeks. The question was cloaked in decorum, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Do you belong in our world?" "My future is built around Amelia's happiness," she replied. "Nathaniel and I are taking things slowly, building something thoughtful. I won't rush into anything that doesn't feel grounded." Evelyn's glance sharpened. "And Amelia's father, is he involved?" Before Isabelle could form a word, Nathaniel stepped in, his tone firm. "That's not a concern. Isabelle has full custody. It's her life to live, not one that needs to be measured by anyone else's expectations." Evelyn's lips pursed, though her voice softened. "Forgive me. I only speak from caution. Family matters, especially ones involving children, can grow complicated. In our world, legacy isn't just about love, it's about balance." Isabelle held her gaze calm but resolute. "I understand. But love doesn't need to be calculated. It needs to be earned and protected." Brunch concluded with strained pleasantries and a few silent stretches. As Nathaniel escorted Isabelle and Amelia back to the car, he turned to her with quiet remorse. "I'm sorry," he said. "My mother has lived too long inside a glass world, but I won't let her opinions shape what we have." Isabelle exhaled, pressing a soft kiss to Amelia's head. She'd seen this before, the whispered doubts, the raised eyebrows, the questions wrapped in politeness. Jack's family had once done the same, always reminding her that love in their eyes was transactional. But this time something was different. Nathaniel hadn't looked away. He'd stood beside her, not in front or behind. And in that small act, she saw something she hadn't in a long time, the promise of partnership, not protection. What lay ahead would test their bond, the pressure of wealth, the scrutiny of society, and Jack's shadow still circling at the edge of their lives. But for now, she walked forward, choosing hope over fear. Despite the unspoken tension with Evelyn Hartman, Isabelle found a fragile rhythm with Nathaniel. She made no effort to challenge his mother directly, hoping quiet resilience would in time soften Evelyn's sharp edges, or at the very least earn her wary respect. But while she carefully managed the pressures of class and scrutiny, another worry weighed heavier: Jack's request to see Amelia. The idea of letting him step back into their daughter's life haunted her like a distant storm. Could trust be rebuilt where only silence had once remained? One chilly afternoon, as she wrapped up her shift at Harbor Path, her phone buzzed with a message that stopped her breath. "I'm nearby. Let me see her. 1 Hour Corner Cafe on Pine." No more excuses. She stared at the screen, torn. Part of her wanted to ignore him, to shield Amelia from any more confusion, but another part, a quieter one, remembered what it was like to want answers. She typed back, "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. But this changes nothing. The next day, she arrived holding Amelia's tiny mittened hand. Jack was already seated near the frosted windows, his face paler than she remembered, his posture slumped with weariness. When he saw Amelia, his expression cracked. His eyes welled up as he whispered, She's beautiful." At first, Amelia clung to Isabelle's coat, but with gentle coaxing and after a few silly faces from Jack, the toddler giggled softly. Isabelle felt a pang not for Jack, but for the echo of what might have been. But the warmth didn't last. Midway through their visit, Jack's tone shifted. "Things haven't been easy. I lost my job. Rent's overdue. I'm struggling." He looked up at her carefully. "I was hoping maybe you could help, or maybe he could." Isabelle blinked, confused. "He, Nathaniel Hartman." "Don't act like it's a secret," Jack muttered, eyes darting. "He's got money. If you're really playing happy family, maybe he could help me out." Her stomach turned. "Jack, are you asking me to ask him to give you money? I'm just saying it wouldn't hurt. You owe me that much, Isabelle. I was there before all this." "You left," she said, her voice trembling. "You gave up on us." His eyes darkened. "Don't forget we had plans. You chose the baby. You walked." Anger surged through her. "Don't rewrite what you abandoned." Amelia whimpered, sensing the rising tension. Then Jack leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "Maybe I'll fight for shared custody. Judges might see things differently. A struggling single mother now tied to a billionaire. That's the kind of story that makes people look twice. Don't think they won't question your choices." Her heart pounded. The air around them felt poisoned. Holding Amelia close, Isabelle rose. "Stay away from us." Without another word, she pushed through the door and disappeared into the cold tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The quiet of the winter street was no comfort. Jack's threat echoed in her mind. That night, she told Nathaniel everything. He didn't flinch. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice like steel. "He won't touch either of you. Not with lies, not with threats." But even as he wrapped her in a protective embrace, a chill remained in her bones. Not from the winter outside, but from the fear that Jack's desperation could unravel everything she had fought to rebuild. Because when love is reborn from brokenness, it carries with it the shadows of what came before. What began as quiet tension was now gaining momentum, threatening to sweep through everything Isabelle and Nathaniel had built together, and neither of them could predict how quickly the coming days would unravel, or how deeply it would shake Jack to his core. The weight of Jack's veiled threats clung to Isabelle like fog. In response, Nathaniel had wasted no time. He arranged a meeting with one of the top family law attorneys in the city, a woman known for navigating even the messiest custody disputes with unwavering precision. The lawyer, calm and pragmatic, explained that while Jack could file for visitation or partial custody, his history of absence, financial instability, and emotional volatility would make it a difficult case to win. Still, the possibility was enough to keep Isabelle's chest tight with worry. Seeing the toll it took on her, Nathaniel made a quiet decision. He funded a small legal team through Hartman and Wells, one of his firms, ensuring Isabelle and Amelia would be protected. Isabelle initially resisted her pride, bruised by the idea of leaning too heavily on his wealth, but the fear of losing her daughter softened her stance. In the end, she agreed. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's mother, Evelyn, though still cautiously polite, had not hidden her concern over Isabelle's complicated past. Her silences spoke volumes, but for now, at least, she didn't interfere. Then one clear evening, as the city exhaled into spring, Nathaniel invited Isabelle and Amelia to a newly rebuilt playground his foundation had funded, nestled along the quiet bend of the Delacour River. Laughter echoed between bright slides and fresh wood chips as children ran beneath lantern-strung trees. Amelia was off in the distance, with a volunteer caretaker giggling as she tried to catch floating bubbles. Nathaniel led Isabelle on a walk along the water's edge. The fading sunlight shimmered across the surface, painting them in gold and blue. He was quieter than usual, his hands buried in his pockets, shoulders tense. At a small overlook, he stopped. "Isabelle." He began voice low these past months. "You and Amelia. You've become the most unexpected joy of my life. I didn't know I was missing anything until you showed up." Then slowly he sank to one knee. Isabelle gasped, there in the fading light. Nathaniel opened a velvet box, revealing a delicate ring, gold and simple, with a single diamond, catching the glow of the lanterns. "I know things aren't easy, but I don't want to walk beside you as a visitor. I want to stay. I want to love you, protect you, and be a father to Amelia. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision. The world tilted for a moment, not with fear, but with awe. She thought of all the nights she had wept in silence after Jack left. All the mornings she had woken up afraid of how she would make it through, and yet here stood a man who had seen all of it, who still chose her. "Yes," she whispered. Nathaniel stood pulling her into his arms, and the crowd nearby erupted into applause. A small child clapped excitedly. Isabelle laughed through her tears. Amelia came toddling toward them. Just then, reaching up, Nathaniel bent down and scooped her into his arms without hesitation. The image of this man holding her daughter with such tenderness etched itself into Isabelle's soul. In that moment, she wasn't just agreeing to love again. She was saying yes to a future no longer shaped by fear, but by hope. But while love was blossoming on one side of the city, Jack was about to learn of their engagement in a way that would shatter his fragile sense of control and push him into choices that none of them were prepared for. The final reckoning was near, and it would change everything. The wedding was simple, graceful, just as Nathaniel had hoped. No flashing lights, no societal circus. Only close friends, colleagues from Hope Haven, and those who had witnessed Isabelle's quiet resilience along the way. Though Evelyn Hartman maintained a composed presence, her watchful eyes carried a quiet skepticism. She didn't speak against the marriage, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. Nathaniel didn't care. He had made his choice. And Isabelle? She stood firm. She had lived through enough storms to know what calm felt like now. Out of courtesy, not obligation, Isabelle sent a message to Jack informing him of the upcoming ceremony. She didn't expect a response, but what followed was a flurry of bitter texts, accusations, demands, emotional bait, claims that she had stolen their last chance at reconciliation. She didn't reply. Not this time. This chapter wasn't his to write. The morning of the ceremony arrived under golden skies. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass of a small countryside chapel Nathaniel had loved since childhood. It felt sacred, untouched by noise or judgment. Isabelle stood in a gown of ivory lace, simple and timeless. Her hands trembled slightly as her best friend Carmen adjusted her veil. In the front row, Paula, her old manager, dabbed her eyes with pride. Little Amelia, dressed in a tiny white dress that matched her mother's, clung to Isabelle's skirt, babbling softly as if sensing the magnitude of the day. Isabelle took a breath. A year ago, she had sat alone in a dim apartment, holding a baby in one arm and her shattered heart in the other. Now she was stepping into a new beginning, one she never thought she'd find again. The first note of the violin swelled, and she stepped into the aisle. Nathaniel waited at the altar, a navy suit hugging his frame, his expression open and full of quiet awe. As she walked toward him, he didn't look away once. When she reached him, he gently took her hands. There was a shimmer in his eyes, not for show but for truth. The officiant's voice blurred as Isabelle focused on the man before her and the warmth of his fingers tracing calm over her knuckles. They spoke their vows, raw, imperfect, sincere. Words like healing faith, co-parenting, and choosing each other daily made their way into the promises. By the grace given to me, the officiant declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife. As the guests broke into soft applause, Nathaniel leaned in and kissed her gently. And just as they stepped back into the joy of the moment, the chapel doors creaked open. Jack. He stood in the back, uninvited, unannounced. Isabelle saw him out of the corner of her eye, rigid, wide-eyed, disoriented by what he was witnessing. Before she could fully process his presence, Jack began striding forward, his voice cutting through the quiet. You really went through with it, he snapped. Marrying into money, walking away without giving us a real chance. Nathaniel stepped protectively between them, his voice low and calm. Isabelle stood still, her spine straight. Jack, she said quietly, you had every chance. You chose to walk away, and now I've chosen peace, security, discreet, but prepared, emerged from the wings. At Nathaniel's slight nod, they approached. Jack resisted, briefly, his voice rising with empty threats, but no one flinched. He was escorted out. Isabelle's hands were shaking. Nathaniel turned and held her, just held her as murmurs settled into stillness again. In that embrace, she felt not fear, but release. The last loose thread from a former life had snapped clean. Later, as they exited the chapel, hand in hand with Amelia, nestled between them, Isabelle looked back once, just once, and smiled to herself. Jack had tried to interrupt her story, but she wasn't the same woman he left behind. She was now Isabelle Hartman, a mother, a wife. A survivor of storms who had found a harbor and chosen it freely. And as they left for a short, quiet honeymoon in the hills of Vermont, they didn't carry perfection with them, just honesty, just love, and the firm decision to keep walking forward together. Their honeymoon led them to a sun-drenched villa nestled along the cliffs of Santorini, Greece, a place where the sea melted into the sky and the days slowed to a tender hush. With Amelia in tow, it was less traditional honeymoon and more a quiet celebration of the life they were building. Every morning, Isabelle and Nathaniel shared breakfast under blooming bougainvillea, while Amelia chased butterflies along the stone pathways. In the evenings, they sipped crisp island wine and whispered about the future expanding Hope Haven, finding a home outside the city, maybe one day giving Amelia a sibling. The shadow of Jack's outburst at their wedding still lingered, but Nathaniel's calm strength grounded Isabelle. Whatever legal threats remained, the attorneys could handle them. Here, in the golden light of the Aegean, she felt a safety she'd once believed she'd never know again. But peace, as always, proved delicate. Upon their return to New York, Isabelle discovered a large envelope slipped under the penthouse door. No return address, no warning. Inside, a paternity test result. Her eyes froze on the line, Probability of paternity, 0%. Tucked inside was a handwritten note, its tone laced with venom. So now you know, she was never mine. I hope you're satisfied. Jack's name scrawled beneath Isabelle stood motionless, the letter trembling in her hand. For a moment, her breath stopped. Could this be true? She hadn't been unfaithful. She knew that every memory of her pregnancy, the timing, the distance, none of it added up to this. And yet the accusation gnawed at her, an invisible crack forming beneath her feet. Nathaniel read the document silently, then looked up. "This isn't real," he said gently. "You know that." But shame and confusion twisted inside her. Could Jack have forged this to escape child support, or had something gone wrong at the hospital years ago? The legal team quickly uncovered Jack's intent. It was a desperate tactic, an attempt to erase responsibility by denying paternity. Legally, it meant avoiding financial obligations. Emotionally, it was a blow meant to destabilize Isabelle's newfound peace. Nathaniel urged her to seek clarity, not for Jack, but for herself. So she did. She took a second test. One she chose, one done privately, on her own terms, the result. Jack was without question Amelia's biological father. The false test had been nothing but smoke, a manipulative play by a man grasping at control. He had long since forfeited. News of the forged document spread quickly among the circles that had once whispered about Isabelle's motives. The story had flipped. Jack was no longer the jilted ex-husband, but the man who'd tried to weaponize lies against a woman who only ever wanted to protect her child. And with that, something shifted. Isabelle no longer carried fear of judgment. No more apologies, no more second-guessing. She had survived betrayal, weathered public scrutiny, and stood tall through it all. Now standing beside a man who respected her journey and adored her daughter, she could finally breathe. What Jack meant to destroy had only clarified the truth. Isabelle's story was never one of survival alone, it was one of rebirth, because sometimes the cruelest storms uncover the clearest skies, and sometimes the end we fear is only the beginning we never imagined. In Nathaniel Ellsworth, Isabelle had not only found a partner, but a sanctuary. His love wasn't loud or performative, it was present. Steady, a kind of care that showed up in the quietest moments, brushing Amelia's curls from her eyes, standing beside Isabelle when the world tried to shake her listening, when others only judged. Together, they didn't just survive their trials. They dismantled the assumptions people had placed on them, the whispers of status, the burden of the past, the expectations of a legacy Isabelle was never supposed to fit into, and yet she did. Not by becoming someone else, but by staying true to the woman she'd fought to become. Side by side, they faced skeptical glances, veiled comments, and the bitter grasp of an ex-husband desperate to rewrite history, and still they stood stronger for it. Their story wasn't gilded in perfection, but in perseverance, in choosing each other again and again, especially when it wasn't easy. For Amelia, it meant more than just a happy home, It meant being held loved and chosen, not by the man who helped create her, but by the man who chose to be her father, without obligation. And for Isabelle, it meant finally learning that the end of one chapter, no matter how devastating, might just be life's gentle way of turning the page. Some stories don't begin with fireworks, they begin with endings, a broken marriage, a newborn in her arms, and a woman standing alone at the edge of everything she thought she knew. But Isabelle didn't let the past define her. She rebuilt not with anger, but with quiet strength. She chose grace when it was easier to be bitter, and in doing so, she found not just love, but a partner who saw her, respected her, and chose her. Every single day. Together, they turned heartache into healing, and proved that true love isn't about perfect beginnings. It's about standing together through the storm. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you that light can still find its way through the cracks, then please, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of what truly matters. Thank you for being here. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.